This nibble originally aired on RSBANDB Update, episode 843, Archaeology and Spades. Enjoy. Put simply, greater Ricochet, Jagex felt the damage was too strong. And, you ask anybody in the PvM community, it was seen as a must-have ability. And I think after this will be, and I might be, putting the cart before the horse of where we're at on that. You can tell me how you feel on that. But the important points that you noted is that the first 3 hits remain unchanged at 20 to 100% damage, 10 to 50% damage, and 10 to 50% ability damage for all 3, respectively. Any additional hits as a result of the Caroming perk have been toned down to 5 to 15% ability damage, down from 10 to 50%, and Enchanted Ruby Bolts will no longer scale their damage down when triggered as a part of Greater Ricochet, which is something that it did previously, which that one caught my eye. And this is what we've been talking about, that you don't just bring things down, you bring something up to compensate.
Yeah. Well, let's start with that one, because that was one that I think a lot of people didn't
the
realize.
The Ruby Bolts, right?
Yeah, the spell was working as intended, in that any additional damage dealt to the primary target by additional bolts fired at it by the Greater Ricochet ability was halved. That was how it was written in the ability description. And since Ruby Criminal Bolts they just apply a percentage of the opponent's life points and then that damage up to the hit cap, they were getting halved as well when they activated. So instead of getting a 10,000 damage hit when you hit that hit cap, you were getting a 5,000 damage hit when you fired off the Greater Ricochet, which is effectively half the time you fired off a Greater Ricochet, you would get a Ruby Bolt proc. That's kind of the way the math worked. It's maybe not quite that high, but that's a simplified way to think about it. So basically, this means that Ruby Back Bolts now work as intended, or as expected, probably, with the Greater Ricochet ability, which is good. And there's also, so let's do very quick math on what this means. There's two parts to this, right? Firstly is how much worse is it than it was before, just in terms of your total damage.
All right.
And how does it compare now to other abilities, right? We'll do a bottom line TLDR for both of those. It is a meaningful nerf, but it shouldn't impact anyone's ability to do content, and it is still the best ranged ability. So let's dig into
and that's
numbers
what it says on the tin right
briefly.
There, what you just said, best ranged ability.
Right. So digging into the numbers very surface level, right? The ability lost 80% weapon damage on its average damage when used with the Caroming perk, which I think is still worth using as well, for the record. Most range rotations for people that have this ability, they'll use it about 5 times a minute, so we're down about 400% weapon damage, roughly 10 to 12,000 damage a minute. The person who's using this has probably well-developed rotation. We'll give them 250 to 350 damage a minute, which means this nerf comes to a 4 to 5% damage loss for most people using the ability. That's your tagline. It's just, again, a sizable nerf, but there's nothing that you could do before this update that you couldn't do with it now.
And you're saying these numbers are for somebody who is well-versed in the way to run a ranged action bar and probably doing
this is somebody who's
250 to
using
300 hits a minute, right?
Yes, this is somebody who's using full manual, who is or Revolution, but manually activating all of their thresholds and ultimates. They're canceling their snipe after the 3rd tick. They're doing, they're running a ranged rotation at a relatively high level. That's the type of person that I will imagine will have afforded the Greater Ricochet ability. And for people that have lower damage a minute, this, will do potentially proportionally lower damage, but that 4 to 5% should hold up, generally speaking. So that's the overall damage. Now let's talk about how it compares to other abilities, right? Our comparison points for this is that we've gone from 240% weapon damage as our average damage down to 160. This is leapfrogged below Corruption Shot at 200% and Snipe at 172%. But the thing that was maintained with this ability is that it is still hitting 7 times. And this is where the Caroming perk really kind of shines, is that the Caroming perk is doing 40% of that 160% damage. So it's only a quarter now instead of being a much larger part. Actually, instead of being half, it is now a quarter of the damage. So They reduced 3/4 of the impact that perk had. With that said, the perk will still cause the thing to hit 4 additional times. Each of those additional hits has the ability to activate poison. If you're on a criminal bolt, each of those hits has the ability to activate a criminal bolt. If you're on Blood Reaver, each one of those hits can activate their Blood Reaver to then activate your poison.
What does this mean for Hydrix bolts?
They're still busted. I mean, on average, it'll still activate 1 Hydrix bolt every time you use it, because Hydrix bolts are 1 in 7 chance to activate, and they say it's 7 times. I really, really, as a total tangent, think that Hydrix bolts should be made so that their passive ability, like they cannot be activated while their passive ability is present.
Right.
Which is to say that when you have that extra adrenaline gain, you don't then just get an extra 10% and refresh that buff.
Yeah.
I think that would make Hydrix bolts relatively balanced and decrease their use to the point where they would be a reasonable price for when you actually want to use them as a switch. But
that's beside the point from today, folks.
It is. So what I was saying before, it's alone without weapon poison or anything, it's 160% weapon damage, which still makes it the 3rd best basic. So that's if you are not using your criminal bolts and you're on a target you can't poison, which is to say if you're bow camping with a two-hand range on a bow is unquestionably the worst combat style in the game right now, and I absolutely love it. I still do racks this way, so meh. I still get fantastic, I'm still doing damage in that same range as everybody else, so they can just deal. But anyways, the math with this, with the changes, you're still hitting, if you are just on a poisonable target, you're hitting 210% damage. If you're on a poisonable target, you're also using Emerald Bolts, you're hitting about 265%. If you're on a poisonable target with Poison, Emerald Bolts, and a Reaver, you're hitting 360% damage, compared to, once again, 172% for Snipe and 200% for greater or for Corruption Shot. Which is to say that this thing, against any target that is poisonable or any target that you're using the Criminal Bolts on, you're hitting probably 350% average with Ruby Backs on a poison immune target. Any of those targets, if you're using the Criminal Bolts or if you're using anything else, this is like almost twice the damage of the next best basic ability you have. So everybody has to build Adrenaline. This should still be first on everybody's bars if you have the ability unlocked.
So at the end of the day,
that's a story.
So at the end of the day with this, it's still very powerful. It's just not where it used to be. And
it's not busted.
Right.
Yeah.
And to quote some people, this isn't going to, make them make the greater ricochet ability codices tank all the way down.
Everything that you could previously do with this ability unlocked, you should still be able to do with this ability unlocked. There's no damage points I can think of where you're not hitting anymore. You have to work a little bit harder potentially for some damage checks like Solax Core, but that's about it.
And overall, you feel comfortable with that 4 to 5% drop in damage overall?
I do. I mean, once again, like they said in the post, this is still the most powerful thing. This is still totally worth unlocking. It's less powerful than it was, and it brings a ranged back maybe a little bit more in check. I'm fine with it. It doesn't impact me any of the choices I will make about what content I will be doing, and it seems like it's healthier for the game. So sure, all the better, right?
Yeah, and we know that because every time David comes on, he says you can do this boss with tier 80, he says, and he can do that, of course, but we can have the general.
It is doable with tier 80.
It's doable with tier 80,
yeah.
But you can get by with tier 90s for pretty much everything, unless you're
you absolutely
going for those ultimate
tier 90s and 95 prayer and budget budget armor and weapon perks will work for absolutely everything in the game. You do not need anything more than that. Some people feel that dedication to their team, whatever it is, if they have the money to make the upgrades, fine, but you don't need it. It's not necessary.
Yeah. All right. That makes sense. You can find full episodes of RSBANDB Update right here on this YouTube channel. If you found this video useful or just enjoyed it, like and subscribe or leave a comment.